The Quote Goats Podcast. With your hosts, Tommy Gunz. The Quote Goats Podcast.
I go by the name of Tommy Gunz, and I have a special guest on the show today. He goes by the name of Chad O. Jackson. And I'm just gonna ask you the question up front, like, who is Chad O. Jackson? And just give us a brief synopsis of like what you stand for and what you've done and what you plan to do.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. As you said, I'm Chad O. Jackson. And I guess first and foremost, I am a born again follower of Christ. And that's basically what I stand for.
Right.
And I talk a lot about politics and culture. And, you know, which is interesting because I guess the way that I kind of came into the public eye was through politics. I was part of a film that was released in 2020 called Uncle Tom, the oral history of the American Black conservative, which was executive produced by Larry Elder.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. After the release of that film, I helped co-produce part 2, which talks a lot about the civil rights movement and how the civil rights movement was not what many of us think it is. I would venture to say what most of us think it is. It was a movement that helped expand the power of the government at the expense of Americans' freedom. And it did it in the name of race, which was a sensationalized topic at the time. So it was very easy for people to go along with it instead of taking a step back and asking themselves, first of all, is this much ado about nothing? And second of all, what kind of power and control will we be ceding to the government if we were to go the way of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement? And so I talk a lot about that. And what I find is that these things are necessary to talk about because to the extent that we continue to believe history as it's laid out by our public schools, by our celebrity class and so-called expert class and government bureaucrats and this, that, and the third, if we continue to believe the version of history as they put it out there, then we will continue to move closer and closer to a kind of tyrannical globalist state.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe firmly in the autonomy of the individual, the autonomy of the family. I think that what the founding fathers in America managed to do and managed to put together as far as the Constitution is concerned, was a work of art. Was a work of art when it comes to human liberty, when it comes to the power of the citizen, the sovereignty of the municipality and the township and the state, the small state. What they labored over, I think, was actually quite genius. And to the extent that we get further and further away from that, we are losing our grip on what true liberty is on this side of heaven. And so, again, to the extent that we believe the version of history as these enemies of freedom, I'll put it that way, as they lay it out, we will continue to give way to social justice movements, to the rise of demagogue politicians and all the rest, which in my opinion helps to bring us closer and closer to that global tyranny that I'm referring to. So I know that said a lot, but these are the kind of things that I talk about and dip and dabble in.
Right. So you think that the civil rights movement or social justice is a ploy for the government to gain more power over the population?
Absolutely. And it's not just the civil rights movement. Like I said, it's social justice movements in general. When you look at women's suffrage or, what some scholars call first wave feminism,
right?
When you look at second wave feminism, when you look at the civil rights movement, when you look at the LGBT movement, when you look at Black Lives Matter, all of these are social justice movements. And you look at who financially backs and supports these so-called movements and their connections with government, you'll find that it all kind of works in this kind of roundabout way,
Mm-hmm.
because these so-called activists, they get the people riled up, they pinch grievances and appeal to sensationalism so they can build numbers, because there's strength in numbers.
Right.
And these people take to the streets and demand that something be done about what they're told is a crisis or is chaos. And here along comes a politician and says, if you vote for me, I have the answers to fix what you say is broken. And that answer is almost always more government. And so
Mm.
this is the way that these things work. It's agitation to the highest degree. You get people who are already doing well for themselves by virtue of their own merit, and you get some agitator who comes in, mucks it up, get the people riled up, get the people discontent, dissatisfied, taken to the streets and demanding that the government expands itself.
Mm.
And so, yeah, the civil rights movement is very much a part of that.
So you don't think, and I want to expound on that too, but you don't think the civil rights movement was necessary for Black people to reach the point in American society that they have today? You think we could have
No, I
got
don't
here
think it was necessary.
without that?
No, Thomas Sowell talks a lot about this. I've managed to verify this with my own research. My good friend Chuck Littleton, who is somebody, in my opinion, who's up and coming, one of the great researchers of our time. Of course, had he written a book by now, I think that more people would know his name, but he hasn't written anything yet. But he's getting there.
Okay.
He's a family man.
Mm-hmm.
There have been others, G. Edward Griffin. There's a lot of people who have been sounding the alarm on what the civil rights movement actually was, including the late Barry Goldwater, the senator out of Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that he tried to sound the alarm on what the civil rights movement actually was, he was called a ultra-right conservative and a white supremacist and all the things. Never mind the fact that he voted for every civil rights act prior to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which in my opinion was unconstitutional. But to your question as to was it necessary, the answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is because when it comes to relations between Black and white prior to the 1960s, there were huge strides toward progress. And this didn't include the NAACP or any government organization or any activist organization. The reason why Blacks and whites were gradually getting along was because of the free market commerce. To the extent that Blacks were doing well in business and conducting themselves in an upright manner, they were naturally come into contact with white folks through commerce. That familiarity was built within that context, and a lot of these so-called Jim Crow laws were being repealed on the basis that people were finding that they were unfeasible. How can we keep these things up? It's actually costing us more money. Both Blacks and whites were finding this to be true. And as a result, these laws were beginning to be repealed. And not only that, if you go even further back, what you'll find is that a lot of these Jim Crow laws that existed in the South were not something that white people did to Black folks. Black leaders and white leaders both came together, and together they decided to impose and implement these separation laws, which later became known as Jim Crow laws. But they wanted separation, Black leaders as well as white leaders, because what they found is that if we want our people to succeed, then they would have to do so competing with one another, not competing with other cultures. And so people don't look at the true history of separation. And, we look at it as a racist thing that was done to Black folks, not realizing that, when you look at the progress of Blacks economically, familially, in various different facets, the Black success was on an upward trajectory from the end of slavery to about the 1960s. And people who were leading the charge with this progress were the likes of Booker T. Washington, who is famous for many things, but for also the saying of casting down your bucket where you are. Don't wait for the white man. Don't wait for this. Don't wait for that. Don't wait for legislation to pass. It's on you to utilize the skills that you have, the talent that you have, whatever that may be. and hone it, and come into yourself, get your legs under you. And to the extent that you do that, don't worry about what white people do or aren't doing or think or don't think about you. um, People will learn to respect you when you first have respect for yourself. And this was actually true. This was actually proven to be true. He started something called the Negro Business League, which included pharmacists, doctors, dentists, contractors, tradesmen, bankers, all sorts of black professionals. And this existed not only in the South, but in the North too. Philip Payton Jr., for example, he was a stevedore who lived in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And on his off time, he would read old Eastman Kodak camera manuals, and he taught himself to be a photographer.
Mm.
And no, I'm thinking of someone else. I forget his name, but anyway, he moved to North Carolina and was able to uh, be the photographer in this small black town in North Carolina. And he took pictures of uh, of all sorts of black folks for a little over 20 years. And you see these beautiful black and white photos of the people who lived in this town. This was like a lower middle income town, and the people looked like they had respect and dignity about them, unlike what you see coming out of BET and other so-called black programs today.
Right.
But Philip Payton Jr., this is someone else. He was also a part of Booker T. Washington's Negro Business League. He was actually a realtor. He moved to New York at a time when Harlem was predominantly white. He bought a building there in Harlem, an apartment building, moved black tenants into it, and began to buy even more buildings there in Harlem. And other black realtors began to do the same thing.
Right.
And so you had all these black professionals moving to Harlem on the back of the lessons taught to them by the likes of Booker T. Washington. And so it wasn't this waiting for the government, waiting for the white man to do anything for them. They were actually putting their hand to the plow and making things happen.
Right.
When you get to the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act and Martin Luther King's rhetoric is very much different from Booker T. Washington. Where Booker T. Washington said, "Cast down your bucket where you are," Martin Luther King is painting a picture of two Americas. What did he say? He said that whites live on a land of plenty, flowing with milk and honey,
Right.
and black men live on a lonely island of despair where we can't find jobs, we can't find this. He painted a very bleak and miserable picture of the black man. Now, what happens psychologically to the man who's being told by their so-called race leader that you're downtrodden, you can't get this, you can't get that? Well, that begins to settle within you a spirit of bitterness, a spirit of despair, to where if your dad was a local electrician who everybody called black or white, you see what your dad is doing circa 1960.
Mm-hmm.
But you see this Negro leader, this Negro pastor on television saying, we shall overcome and we're living in despair. And you see all your friends at school going to the marches and going to the sit-ins and going to this and going to that. All of a sudden, your dad, the electrician, looks like a square. And so by the time the 1970s come along, you don't want to carry on the family business that your dad set up, that your dad established. Right. You're going to go to the offset of the civil rights movement, which is the Black Power movement. And so you give in to this pro-black identity where you insist on asserting your identity through picketing and protesting and all the things, as opposed to making your way with your hand at the plow like your dad and granddad and great granddad did before you. Oh, and so what we learned to do, and starting in the 60s, was to be self-assertive, not by anything we're doing with our feet, but rather what we're putting on a picket sign. That's our new kind of self-assertion. And so when you look at the fact that over the course of the early to mid 20th century, all the strides that blacks were making in terms of being able to buy land and buy properties, what you see in the 80s going into the 90s is these houses are being sold and liquidated, and our parents are going on vacation. I'm a millennial. I was born in 1990.
Mhm.
Our parents were liquidating those assets, going on vacation, going on cruises, living their best life. And they left nothing to our generation. So
Mm.
now you have people in our generation saying, where is my generational wealth?
Mm.
Oh, slavery. That's where my generational wealth went, is
400 years
slavery.
ago. I mean, not
Yeah. And
400
so
years ago, but 400 years.
we lost track of our history. And I think the civil rights movement, it gives us this kind of excuse to complain about slavery, complain about things that that don't really affect us in any real way,
Right.
and we don't look at how we lost track of where we were culturally and how we were able to make those strides to begin with. We were on an upward trajectory. The 60s came, we went on a rapid decline, and now we're complaining about slavery, something that has nothing to do with any of where we are today.
Right. I mean, yeah, you said a mouthful there, but I feel like how I feel about slavery is like you said, it doesn't really affect my life today and like what I decide to do in my everyday life. Nobody's refusing, my presence in life because, oh, you were a slave hundreds of years ago. Like it doesn't. Nobody. It doesn't affect my life, and I know it doesn't affect the majority of like black people's lives. But there's this victimhood mentality that I guess you saying started around the 60s with all the civil rights movement and stuff like that. But I never really
It started in
the 60s. But I never really, because when I grew up, like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were like hailed as like heroes to the black community, you know what I'm saying? And all the literature, all the, depictions of them on television and documentaries and stuff like that. It was like, how it was painted was that, even at that time, black people were still severely downtrodden. You see the videos of people getting hosed and getting dogs sicked on them, and it would make you think lynchings was still going on or something like that at this time. But then I would always kind of wonder, like, how did Martin Luther King get such a prestigious position, and why he don't look like he look like you right now with the suit on. You
better be careful asking those questions.
He got money, you know what I'm saying? He all on TV, but everybody else is like still, in the trenches as a black community and stuff. And I guess
in the trenches though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and that's where. But the depiction, the picture that they put out to everybody was so. It was just one perspective of maybe some black people, maybe it was some instances like today, like let's draw a correlation to like police brutality today.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it was Candace Owens that pointed this out. I think last year or in 2020 or something, or the year where they were acting like, or it was a perception of so much police brutality going on. So many black people are getting killed by the police. And I think that year maybe 15 black people were unlawfully shot by police. Right. And in that same year, 19 people were struck by lightning. So it was like more likely to get struck by lightning than to be a black person getting shot by the police in that year, and probably other years too. But the perception that the media put out, and that everybody who has the inclination for the cops to be racist, they didn't want to do no research. They didn't want to hear nothing to the contrary of the police are racist. They killing us indiscriminately just because we black. Blase, blase, blase. And that's where all the Black Lives Matter movements came from. Even over here, I went to a Black Lives Matter protest in Germany with like 100,000 people there or something like that in Nuremberg, Germany. Yeah. Me, my wife, and my newborn son were there. And it was mostly white people who was, you know, in relationships
Go
with
figure.
black people and stuff, you know. But, you know, I've seen this kind of firsthand, and then the more I look into that whole situation, it was like they want you to believe that George Floyd was a martyr and, you know,
Right.
he's someone to,
Yeah.
you know, be the centerpiece of like the new, you know, movement that's saying Black Lives Matter. But even when I was at the protests and all that was happening, I was kind of like, I don't need this to tell me my life matters and stuff, you know, just because this one instance of some dude questionably dying in a police situation where if you watch the longer video, he resisted arrest for a long time, was obviously on something, told the people, he said he was gonna die. He probably knew he was finna have a heart attack because he was on what's that drug that kills a lot of people who do coke, fentanyl or whatever. And you know, it's debatable whether his
No, he was actually on 2 drugs.
right.
He was on fentanyl and meth. He had both meth and fentanyl in his system.
And he asked,
Deadly
they tried to put
dosage.
him in the car, and he asked to be put on the ground. He asked to be laid out on the ground like that. But I'm kind of losing my point. But I can see what you're saying, because even while that was going on, it was seemingly the right thing to do to be a part of this movement because that happened. But when you really look at the scope,
question.
Just let me say this one more thing. When you really look at the scope of the police, and you got to think of, I tell people, you got to think of like how many police there are, how many people there are, how many instances police have to interject into things that happen in society and do their job a year, you know, hundreds of thousands of interactions with people, or maybe even more. But, you know, they're not going to be perfect, and things are going to happen, and things are going to go awry. You know, like people are going to, and sometimes somebody going to get shot. Sometimes bad things are going to happen, you know, in the bigger scope of things, you know, but that doesn't necessarily mean, just because you put a magnifying glass on these few instances, that doesn't necessarily mean that the totality of the police force is like this racist entity that's only out to kill black people, you know, when they get unruly in a police situation. But what were you going to say?
No, I mean, you said a lot too. And everything that you said was on point. I mean, when it comes to the areas that the police have to patrol, the fact is, a city that has high crime rates or high potential for crime, if that city's leadership is smart and wise, then they will necessarily put more police presence in areas that tend to be more hostile, more violent, this, that, and the third. And so, to the extent that something pops off, you know, I'm actually quite impressed that the numbers are what they are in terms of the number of black folks who are shot by the police, because it could be a lot more if you have people who didn't know what they were doing, if you have police officers who didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
And so, you know, let's say we go the route of Black Lives Matter. Let's say we give them what they want and pull all the police out of these high crime areas. What then will happen? Of course, you will see more homicide. You will see more of a kind of anarchy, where women, children, and elderly people are not safe because they will get caught in the crossfires of gang violence. And that, I mean, we all know what's going on. To the extent that you pull the police out, the gangs will fill that vacuum and will be more present, will be more intimidating, more domineering, this, that, and the third. And so people aren't thinking about these things practically. Just from a practical, I'm not even asking you to be wise. I'm asking you to be practical. And that's, you know, that's the reality of it. When you look at, and to go back to what you were talking about earlier, and what I was talking about with the whole civil rights thing, there's a, you know, back when there was the Soviet Union, there was an agency within the Soviet Union called Agitprop. Now, Agitprop is a merging together of 2 words, agitation and propaganda.
Mm.
Agitprop was responsible for a lot of agitation that took place in the United States, including the burning down of black churches.
Oh.
To the extent that they burned down black churches, that they were doing a lot of rabble rousing in the South. Um, Naturally, the story or the headline read, Klan burns down church. Klan does this, Klan does X, Klan does Y, Klan does Z. Now, I found evidence of the fact that a lot of Klan happenings were influenced by the communists. And not only that, you have black pastors, quote unquote, who are burning down their own churches and saying the Klan did it. Now, why would they do such a thing? Well, the answer to that question is the same reason why in 2020, in 2021, in 2022, and 2023, the media would have a vested interest in making you think that police brutality against blacks is an epidemic or is on the rise. Namely, that they understand that this creates the exact climate that they wish to have, where people are desperate for the government to step in and do something about it. And again, it all leads back to the same thing. All the rivers flow to the same ocean, which is the desire to expand the role of the government.
Mm.
For the government to just become all the more expansive, all the more powerful. But hey, at least we're safer as a society. At least we're safer as a people, and we've gotten rid of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and racism and homophobia and sexism and all the things. And so these social justice movements will always tell you that a certain thing is on the rise, or a certain thing is an epidemic, or this chaos is out of control, this crisis is out of control. Something must be done about it.
Right.
And again, the only thing that we know how to do in the West when it comes to something needing to be done is vesting the power in the government and in the bureaucracies to do that something that we say needs to be done. We can, of course, point to, like, why is it that they were never able to find, and except in some cases, we were never able to find these arsons who were burning down these churches and doing all these things.
Right.
Even to the extent that you call Derek Chauvin a modern day Klansman or a modern day lyncher because he killed George Floyd, only to find out that that's actually not true. He didn't kill George Floyd. George Floyd killed George Floyd. But even someone like, even the people that we call racist today, you actually look at the totality of what happened in these instances, and you'll find that, okay, the police officer may have done something, and I'm not talking about George Floyd at this point, I'm talking about in general. Take Mike Brown, for example. The police officer may have done something or made a step that wasn't the smartest step at the time, and it resulted in this and it resulted in that. But even if we can say that it was a police officer's fault that this kid or this black man or whomever died, can we then say definitively that his doing that was motivated by racism?
Exactly. But
Nobody asks.
That's always the
questions.
go-to, though. If it's a black and white thing, they go straight to racism.
Mm-hmm. And the last point I'll make is this on the civil rights matter. Of course, I have a lot to say about it, but I'll end it by saying this, because I'm sure there's other things you want to get to. Harry Belafonte was a good friend of Martin Luther King's. Now, Harry Belafonte died a year or two ago. He was well into his 90s. Now, here's a man, like I said, well into his 90s. So he's been around for a very long time. He's been around at the peak of civil rights and all these things. When I tell you that 3 years ago, he was being interviewed, and 3 years ago, 2020, he was being interviewed, and they were talking about racism. And he said out of his own mouth that right now, never mind the 1960s, never mind the 1950s, never mind any of that, right now is the most racist I've ever seen America.
Wow.
Now, if you're a thinking person, and you listen to him say that, again, he was involved in the civil rights activity of the 1960s. If you're a thinking person like myself, who was born in the 1990s, and you went to school, you watched Roots, you learned about Black history, you learned about all this stuff, you've seen the black and white footage that you talked about with the hoses and the dogs and the, this and that and the third. Of course, you're thinking that, wow, I'm glad I wasn't born back then. I'm glad I didn't have to put up with that. How bad that must have been. That was so racist, and we made so much progress. Of course, you're thinking that.
Mm-hmm.
So to hear Harry Belafonte, and he wasn't a dementia patient when he said this, he was speaking to the camera or to the interviewer as clearly as I'm speaking to you now.
Right.
So for him to say that right now is more racist than any other point in American history, that makes me call cap on everything else that you say. That makes me call nonsense on everything else. You're like everything that I learned, all those dominoes can come crashing down when I hear a man like that saying that. Because to me, it's like, if I can't trust you as a black man in America who knows that it's not a racist country, who has never experienced any racism. So for you to say that right now is racist, how can I believe you about what you say about the 1960s?
That's
so
a good point. Good point.
Again, a lot of the stuff that they were saying, like, oh, another church burning, another this, another that, we didn't even do the due diligence to see who was actually behind all these things. We just kind of take it at face value and think to ourselves, man, it must have been so hard to be a black person. And not only that, it wasn't as if you were a random black person in 1963 on your way to church, and all of a sudden here comes a police officer with a dog, and here comes the fire department with some hoses, and they're ready to plow you down. That's not what happened. This was a strategic tactic that was conducted by the civil rights leaders who got the example of how to do this from Soviet Union agitprop tactics, where they strategically went into these areas. They didn't pull permits. They gathered together what they called freedom riders. These were youngsters who were bussed down from the north, and also youngsters, high school age and middle school age kids in the South, got them into the streets and marched, because they understood in the age of motion picture and news media that to the extent that you can capture with a camera in HD dogs, hoses, to the extent that you can get that on camera and put that on the front page of the newspaper, that will create this kind of stimuli and this kind of reaction and all who sees it. And you'll have more and more people joining the ranks of the civil rights movement, begging Lyndon Johnson to pass legislation, which, you know, they did, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which Title II and Title VII gives the government intrusive powers into how small businesses ran in the United States. And that was the whole goal. And so again, it wasn't as if, you know, dogs and hoses were being sicked on black people who were just on their way to church trying to mind their own business. They used the same hoses and dogs on predominantly white organizations prior to the 1960s. I found footage of them sicking dogs and hoses on predominantly white unions who were protesting and picketing and striking and all the things, who did so and gathered in large intersections in cities without pulling permits. To the extent that the police come and try to disperse the crowd and you won't move, you won't budge, you necessarily have to use force to disperse the crowd. And so, again, people aren't thinking about these things logically because we're so sensationalized by race.
I never heard it put like that before, because if you watch any movie, especially like a racially charged movie or something about that time period, they make it seem like you said, you could just be a black dude walking down the street or going to the gas station or something. Uh-oh, the police pulled up. They finna harass me for no reason. What you doing over there, boy? What you doing, boy? Get over here, boy. You know? And then
but how many older black folks have you talked, movies aside, how many older black folks have you talked to who gave you an example of something like that happening to them?
I mean, none really. I have a lot of older black people in my family. My dad, because I kind of grew up on a farm in Alabama, and
so you better than anybody should have stories.
Kinda. Like my dad, he was raised by my great he was raised by his grandfather, which is my great grandfather, and he was half Jewish and half black. His name was Steinberg, and he took his wife's last name to escape Jewish persecution in Alabama at the time. That's a whole nother story. But they were sharecroppers, and I guess the farm was given to my grandfather after whoever owned it before. And my mom, she also grew up on like a sharecropping farm. My mom was like one of the first kids to be integrated into white schools in Alabama and stuff. But even my mom had like a white best friend growing up, and they haven't really told me. I mean, they are from that generation, so they will tell me that racism was worse back then, but they've never really told me, or we haven't had those conversations to where they've told me some crazy racist thing that happened to them back then, And even me thinking back to like my childhood, the only racist thing I can think of was I kind of got chased by some white guys in a pickup truck. It was super stereotypical racist shit. But yeah, I was kind of walking down the street. Yeah, kind of. I was kind of walking down the street, and they like rolled by in a big pickup truck, and they were like waving shotguns and stuff. But they didn't come for me or whatever. But I just happened to be there, and then they were like kind of like saying stuff to me as they rolled by. So little me, I picked up a rock and like threw it at the truck. Cause I'm like, fuck y'all, and then they turned the truck around and they came back, and I was like, oh, I had to like run in the woods, and then all the niggers and all the stuff came out, you know what I'm saying? But
shouldn't have thrown that rock.
I shouldn't have thrown the rock, I should have just let them go about their business. But other than
they probably just got off or got done with a hunting trip, and
who knows? They was excited, and then I threw a rock at them and stuff. So
you done messed around and threw a rock at them.
Yeah, I just but other than that, it was only, and I went to like an all black school where a few white people went, but I was cool with the white people. But my community was black. I come from a really small town in Alabama. The population was like under 200 or something like that. I didn't really interact with many people outside of my race until I got out of Alabama and went to the military and stuff like that. And
how were your teachers at your school? Were they also black, or were they white, or
they were mostly white? I had a few black teachers though in like elementary school, and they were
and what year? You're 37, so that would have been the late 80s.
Well, I was born in 86, so it was like 90 early.
You went to high school in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, elementary school in the early 90s.
Yeah. Black teachers were they were good though. They were super strict, but even back then they didn't it wasn't like pushing this second class citizen idea on me because I was black and stuff like that. They were hard on me because we were both the same color and stuff, and because they wanted the sentiment I got, it was because they wanted the best for me, not because they thought it was gonna be harder on me in society because I was. Did
you ever get the sense that your teachers were racist? You're at a predominantly black school and your teachers were mostly white. Did you ever get the sense that because you just said that you didn't think they looked down on you. Did you ever get the sense that they were racist at all?
No, never. I never. That just never crossed my mind at the time, and it wasn't pushed.
With that being said, if it were today, given George Floyd, given Black Lives Matter, everything that has transpired over the last 3 years, if you were in that same context today, if you were a youngster going to these schools, predominantly black school, predominantly white teachers, do you think that you would think that they were racist?
Probably, yeah. I would
So
scrutinize everything they did to me as like an act of racism, probably.
and that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that it's not so much that racism is hunting down every black person across the scope of our country.
Mm-hmm.
That's not it at all. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier before we started with the podcast, which is that we are conditioned. We are conditioned to think a certain way. We are conditioned to land on a certain side of the spectrum politically. That is, most of us are conditioned to be liberal in how we approach politics. We are conditioned, if you're black, to think that everything is racist, to think that if you are born with dark colored skin, then you are automatically at a disadvantage because that means you have to work harder, that the white person's automatically going to be treated better, this, that, and the third. And so we're conditioned to be this way, and nobody stops to question that, and instead we just kind of go along with it because it's virtuous to go along with it.
Right.
You'll be looked at as a good person, as a virtuous person, to be a crusader against racism, to be an anti-racist, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we, and these are the kind of questions that I ask myself, how do we break those spells? Because all this stuff isn't happening by accident. It's not an accident that Black Lives Matter got the prestige and the prominence that it got in 2020. It wasn't an accident that it's not an accident that the media again goes on and on and on about police brutality and all the things. None of this stuff is an accident. It's all meant and geared toward a certain end goal. And so for someone like me to speak out and say, well, actually, last I checked, I'm a heavily melanated man, and I'm not experiencing any of the stuff that you're talking about. It becomes necessary for me to do that because I pretty much like my liberty. I pretty much like my freedom, and I see what's going on, and I fear that to the extent that more and more people who look like me give in to the spell, allow themselves to be emotionalized and sensationalized into believing something that's not true, the more that happens, the more their ranks and their numbers grow, and they will have all the more permission to usurp my freedom and my liberty. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen for my sake. I don't want that to happen for my children's sake. And it's to that extent that I try to speak out against it.
So you say all of this is kind of like a ploy for more government.
Mm-hmm.
So in your like perfect world, or what's your idea of like what the government should do? Like, what are we paying tax dollars for if the government doesn't like, make laws and make us adhere to them and things like that?
I'm not saying that the government shouldn't exist. I'm not an anarchist. I'm not saying that the government shouldn't have certain powers, certain requisite powers. I believe, like John Jay, one of the founding fathers who wrote a number of the Federalist Papers, that wherever you go in the world, you will have government. Government is inevitable. It's inescapable. The question is, what kind of government will we have? That's a question that we get to answer in a republic, in a democratic republic, in a constitutional republic. My concern is that we underutilize that here in the United States. Not only do we underutilize it, we don't even know how to use it. We don't even know how the government is supposed to function. I guess, which gets to your question, which is, how do I believe the government should function? I believe that the federal government's power should be extremely limited. There's no reason why they should have all of these departments. We shouldn't have a Department of Education. We shouldn't have like a Department of Energy. We shouldn't have any of these departments. Those things should be left up to the private sector. At the same time that the government's expanding, you have a systematic, deliberate agenda to weaken men, to weaken masculinity.
Mm.
And so we as men don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe in ourselves to educate our children. We don't believe in ourselves to protect our food. We don't believe in ourselves to build our infrastructure and create peace and stability in our land. And to the extent that those things go left undone, the government comes along and usurps the power to control those things. And so, again, when you look at social justice movements, they're driven by fear.
Right.
Fear is a debilitating feeling. When you're debilitated and you distrust your ability to provide for yourself, you distrust your ability to step up to the plate and rise to the occasion, you will vest and punt that responsibility elsewhere to someone else. And so, again, feminism, as I mentioned earlier, is meant to emasculate society. So men aren't what they used to be. We just aren't. And so, again, because of this, we're also, that's another reason as to why we're investing a lot of power and control to the government. And so, you know, in the perfect world, we'll have a small government with very limited powers. We wouldn't be taxed out the wazoo like we are.
Mm.
We wouldn't have a income tax. It's absurd to me that our income is taxed. This is money that you worked hard for. This is money that you got out of bed early, went to work, broke your back to scratch the earth to make a living, so you can bring home funds to make sure that your dwelling is paid for, to make sure you got food on your table, to make sure that your kids are cared for and properly educated. You did that. The government didn't do that. The government didn't do that. You did that. So the fact that the government has first dibs to your paycheck is absurd. Before you even see the check, the government has already gotten money out of it. And then we have the socialist program called Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare. I mean, again, if as a man and as people, it's your responsibility to take care of your health. It just is.
Mm.
And the fact is, we don't need Medicaid and Medicare to be cared for medically. There's doctors and doctor firms, or I'm sorry, there's clinics and doctors who are willing to work with you and come up with a family plan and all the things to make sure that your family's health needs are provided.
Okay.
The fact that we kind of centralize all of this power into the government makes it to where we're not able to be creative with how we go about making sure that these needs are met. I feel that whenever we operate on a peer-to-peer basis, instead of assuming that the default should always be a kind of governmental answer to the questions that we have, that takes away the effectiveness and it takes away the effectiveness of the goods and services that we would otherwise have. Again, if we are doing things more on a peer-to-peer basis, it becomes more personal, it becomes more effective, relationships are built, this, that, and a third. But when we kind of depersonalize it and make everything a kind of top-down government-led thing,
Mm-hmm.
That makes it all the more, I guess, subpar. I mean, if you go to any kind of government ran facility, whether it's to get your driver's license or whatever, the people who work at these places are miserable. They treat you like crap, like you're just a number.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go to a mom and pop shop to order a sandwich, hey, how are you doing? What's your name? Where are you from? You know what I mean? It's more personal.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I feel like a lot of the goods and services that we have here in the United States would be better off left to the private sector as opposed to the government.
I mean, I feel you. In Germany, I think you said taxes out the wazoo.
Mm-hmm.
I pay like 20%
Oh wow.
of my income in taxes. And this year I hit a new tax bracket, so I had to pay taxes twice for the year prior, and they predicted my next year of income, and I had to pay taxes on that. So I'm like,
But here's the thing, though: the difference between a Germany and a United States is that Germany, for the most part, is a homogenous country. These are people with, for the most part, with a shared history that goes back hundreds of years, thousands of years, and in some cases, depending on which European country you're talking about.
yeah,
And so it's much easier to pull off a kind of socialist program with very little pushback in a pretty much homogenous small European country, as opposed to a very diverse country like the United States. I'm not saying diverse merely, in terms of ethnicity or race. I'm talking about diversity in terms of culture, in terms of thought, in terms of political thought, this, that, and the third. We don't agree on anything here in the United States. And so
right,
again, this is yet another reason as to why the government should be small in a place like the United States. Because, again, to the extent that you expand the government, the government is now imposing a kind of uniform culture, a uniform identity on the people who should otherwise be diverse, as far as I'm concerned. Think of it in the same way of as like a church. A church is made up of people who go there voluntarily. Nobody forces them. Nobody put a gun to their head and say, go to church. They go there voluntarily. They pay tithes. They do potlucks. They share and they gather and they do the things. You can call it a kind of micro socialist thing.
right,
Although I hate the word socialism, I hate the word communism, but in terms of how they operate, this is a kind of socialist thing in terms of its the fact that you have people sharing and doing all the things. But again, that's on a voluntary basis. You can't do it on a mandatory basis because you will get pushback. You will get discontent. You will get unrest and all the things to the extent you try to force that on people.
right,
And so this is what these people are trying to do. They're trying to force it on a wide scale on people who will certainly react and certainly be unhappy with it. Again, this is the reason why you leave government small, and the places where needs come up, those needs should be met on a peer-to-peer basis in the private sector. We shouldn't be taxing people at the wazoo to pay for things that their ethics don't agree with.
right.
I don't agree with abortion. I don't agree with the public school system. I don't agree with a lot of the things that we have here in the United States. And so the fact that I am being taxed to pay for those things that I disagree with, I believe is unethical. My my children are homeschooled. We have 4 children. I pay out of my own pocket for the curriculum that my children are being educated with. It's a classical curriculum. So I'm in a sense being double taxed because I'm paying for their education, but at the same time, through my property taxes, I'm also having to pay for the local school that we don't utilize. And so again, to the extent that you centralize these powers and you force the people to pay for them, whether they use them or not, I think is a backward system that needs reform.
Wow. Yeah, I never heard it quite put like that. Because you mentioned church is like a voluntary kind of micro socialistic system or whatever. Because you can go if you want to go, and if you can be there, and if you decide not to pay tithes, you don't necessarily have to. So
right,
that makes it kind of a better thing. But here in Germany, if you go to church, it's a church tax. Like they take it out of your check. It's not a voluntary thing. So a lot of people left the church in Germany because they already getting taxed crazy. And like if you don't belong to like the Catholic church system over here, you don't even get a burial plot. Like your family has to like pay extra money to like find somewhere to bury you, or you have to be like, I think cremation. You can get cremated, or you have to like rejoin the church and like pay up. It's kind of a crazy thing. But yeah, I see what you're saying about the government and like pretty much the policing of ideas is kind of what I'm kind of stuck on, and kind of what got me interested in podcasting. Because I noticed like a lot, of course, like the mainstream media, they all have a script. I've seen this one video where they're like all, it's like 100 stations saying the exact same script verbatim, word for word. I can't remember what exactly they're like announcing or whatever, but it's all of these small town news organizations were a part of the same like entity, and they all disseminated the same exact script for them to all read on the same day at the same time. And they put it was like 100 little expanding videos as the video go on. And I was like, whoa. So it's not a surprise to me that the mainstream media is controlled by whoever it's controlled by. And they all have a certain agenda to push. They have a certain way they word things. They want a certain idea to be the prevalent one in society. And if you disseminate from that one, especially if you work for them, like if you're a journalist or a talking head on one of these shows, if you disseminate from what they want you to say, then you're out of it. You fired. You canceled. Your life is over. Maybe you get a Me Too charge or something like that. They're gonna get rid of you. It's obviously a orchestrated thing, and like getting away from the whole black thing. But like you said, other civil rights movements, like now it's like you were saying, the whole feminization of men thing, and like going away from masculinity. Masculinity is toxic. Women should be in charge of everything. The pay gap lie. You can go on and on with it, and it's pushed in the mainstream media. It's pushed in liberal podcasts. It's pushed on. TikTok is very liberal, and it's pushed in the movies and the TV shows the most. Like, I can't watch something now without getting completely taken out of whatever story's being told by some trans person popping up in the scene, and they just randomly have to be told that they're beautiful and they're special in the moment. And I'm like, why did they put this right here? I don't care. Like, whatever, trans people exist. Then I turn the channel and I watch something else, and it might be the same trans person in this movie doing the same thing, replacing a long beloved character, and now it's a dude in a dress, a la the Cinderella movie. They got this black gay dude in a dress, and he's like Cinderella, and it's supposed to be a kids movie, and you're supposed to tell me that this is not a ploy to influence the way children think about this subject. It's not just that you didn't just put that there. And it's been like videos of Disney employees, like higher up employees, saying, oh, my not so secret gay agenda, I want to put this in as many movies as I possibly can. And, and I think people don't realize how susceptible to persuasion and to propaganda they are, even as adults. They don't, like, everything you watch it can sway how you think, even down to a commercial, an advertisement. They are trying to convince you to buy this product and get you familiar with it, to where the next time you see it and it's on sale, you probably buy it because you saw that ad, But people, it's like this administration with Joe Biden. He sat down with the trans person, Dylan Mulvaney, in the White House. Why? Why is he sitting down with this man who thinks he's a woman? I think he was on his, 70th day of being a woman at the time. And you feel the need to bring this person to the White House. TikTok feels the need to boost his account to where he got like 8 million followers. I think he just won the Woman of the Year award. He was on the Forbes list. Like, all this imagery even to adults, but especially to kids.
Well, hold on. I have to correct you though. He
Okay.
didn't say he's a woman. He said he's a girl.
Right. Girlhood is
This
the
is a
quote.
grown man who's saying he's a girl.
Right,
But-
right. But that's
but yeah,
supposed to be
everything- yeah.
celebrated. You know?
Right.
Even Disney, they lost, and all the companies are doing it at their detriment because they're hemorrhaging money. Because they're more concerned with this agenda and this message of inclusion. So that they call
Well, the thing about it is
they're making money with their companies and stuff.
the thing about it though is like whenever they do it, and this is, I mean, they have, millions of dollars, so it's not, they don't care about losing a couple of customers here and there or losing money. Whenever they, we lost $60 million over the course of this month, you'll have, conservative commentators who make videos and memes making fun at Bud Light and other companies. Oh, y'all lost $60 million. I bet you learn your lesson now. Meanwhile, the executives at Bud Light, they're getting the last laugh, because here's the thing, they're not thinking about you and me whenever they put these commercials out there and all these things. Disney, they're not thinking about you and me, a couple of 30-year-olds. They're thinking about your children. What they're doing is called normalization.
Right.
To the extent that you could pump the media airwaves with pro-trans, pro-LGBT propaganda, they are laying the groundwork for future generations. Because to the extent that your children's, little mental clouds is being pumped with the normalization of LGBT, they will learn to think that this is normal, that this is acceptable, that this is moral, and you're actually immoral if you challenge it.
Right. That's my point.
Because to the extent that you challenge it, you're challenging the humanity of this trans person. So they're conditioning children to be accepting of it. So they're not so much thinking of folks like myself or you. They're thinking about the younger generation. They're trying to normalize a climate to be acceptable of this kind of thinking.
Right. That's exactly my point and what I was getting at, but I don't know, because like I have two smaller kids,
Mm-hmm.
My son is actually in a Disney movie. He when he was 2, my son and my daughter are actually in the same Disney movie. It was because my wife is a model here in Germany, and she got him signed up to 50 agencies. My daughter been modeling since she was like 5 days old or something like that.
Oh wow.
The movie that they're in is kind of like the story of a black a mixed race black man in Germany, and how he like fought racism in Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall and stuff. And my son plays his son, and my daughter plays like the newborn version of him or whatever. But other than that, but when I was on set, even though it was I don't think it was any like homosexual agenda in this movie. But it was like LGBTQ stuff all over the set. Like everywhere you went, it was like rainbows and like stuff like that. But to my point, me having a small son, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that everything that he's seeing and interacting with in these very formative years of who he's going to be when he grows up, I try to be very cognizant of like what he watches, and because I think when he first started kind of talking, and he realized that it's two kind of human beings, like a boy and a girl, right? And at first he was just kind of he was around more girls in his daycare. So he was just kind of calling everybody he saw a girl, because that was the only word he could say. He didn't know how to say boy in German yet. So he was just kind of calling everybody a girl, even little boys. I would read him books, and every figure was a female figure to him, and I had to explain to him, like, no, this is a girl and this is a boy. Girls usually have longer hair, they have dresses and skirts on, and blah blah blah. At least in the book, that's how you can tell them apart. And I could see the wheels turning in his head, like, okay. And I would tell him, like, you're a boy, because he would point at me like, me, girl? And not thinking, like, not knowing. He just didn't know, and I had to, like, literally explain it to him, like, no, you're a boy, like your papa, and your mama's a girl, blah, 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 blah. And if I didn't do that as a parent in this, day and age, maybe somebody else would have explained that to him, or maybe he just would have came to the conclusion that there's no difference between the two by, everything he sees in society these days. He would have got confused, and next thing you know, he would have got into some kind of friend group in school that was confused too. And I think it's a snowball. Like, they're trying to sell that, you can be born this way. But I think, in my opinion, we're the sum total of our, like, experiences and the things we see and the decisions we make while, like, navigating, life and stuff like that. I don't think we're born with an idea or a sexual orientation, but we can be swayed either way, especially when we're kids. So I think you're right about people like Disney, putting these ideas into these children's movies, trying to make them normal for the newer generations. So it perpetuates throughout society in that way, because people like you and me, we already see what's going on, and we will, I'm a talking head. I'll make a video calling them out on stuff like that, because I can see what they're doing. But if I was born up in it and indoctrinated through that thinking and ideology, then I might agree with it, and I might want to shun anybody who doesn't agree with it and call them a horrible person, because, like you said, they're trying to, like, discount trans lives or gay people lives. But in actuality, if most of society agreed with this, and if most of society was gay, where would we be as a society? Like, what would life look like?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think what you said, though, is key. Namely that, you are actually being a father to your son, and you're actually educating your son and leading him in the direction that he should go. That will look different if you just put your child in front of Nickelodeon and Disney and PBS and let these television programs raise your son. And unfortunately, there's a lot of parents who do that. Right. I mean, if you watch PBS or what is it, PBS Kids, with all the shows that they have on there, whether it be Sesame Street or whatever the case may be, there's a lot of political propaganda that is being pushed in these shows. And once again, it's kind of laying a groundwork or building a framework that is very leftist in essence. And I use the word leftist for lack of a better word. I think it's something actually more sinister than that. But again, I mean, to me, secular leftism is to the West as Islam is to the Middle East. That is to say, it is the religion of the state that you are indoctrinated into, right? That you are born and bred into. And so it takes intentional parenting to counteract everything that the surrounding culture is trying to push you toward. And that takes, that, like I said, it takes intentional parenthood, and it also takes self-control and discipline and self-respect and all the things. And that goes for any culture. That goes for anywhere in the world. Wherever you find yourself, you have to be principled. And I think everything that you just explained, as far as your conversations with your son, is an example of that, of what we should be as men and fathers.
Mhm.
And so as far as like where we would be as a society if the LGBT had their way, which I think is your question, um, I think we're seeing that. I think we are witnessing that firsthand. When you look at Hollywood, circa 1970, in the 1970s, a lot of these Hollywood um, studios
Mhm.
began to be infiltrated with um, they call themselves gay lib activists, gay liberation activists, and it these people have been around for a long time, so it's not anything new. I say the 1970s, but it dates back even further than that. I mean, you could look at examples of it during the Harlem Renaissance. A lot of
Mhm.
people don't know, but Langston Hughes was a homosexual. A
Whoa.
lot of your favorite uh, artists during the Harlem Renaissance were either gay or bisexual.
Okay.
Um, and but that's a different story for a different time.
Right.
But anyway, like as you move from the turn of the 20th century to the 1970s, you see this kind of increase in homosexual representation in media. And then in the 1970s, a lot of gay lib activists began to buy up or infiltrate a lot of the studios in Hollywood. At the same time, they were rebelling against the war, the Vietnam War,
Mm.
and they were saying things like um, masculinity is not portrayed in going to Vietnam and beating up people. Masculinity instead is portrayed by sharing your feelings. And so the
Hmm.
the
Make love,
gay
not
liberation,
war, and stuff like that.
yeah, make love not war.
Mm.
Gay liberation coincided with second wave feminism at the same time that you're empowering, and I use that word empowering very loosely. They're not so much empowering as much as they are indoctrinating. But at the same time that you're indoctrinating women to be anti-marriage, to be pro-indulgence, to be sluts, so on and so forth. At the same time that that's happening, you
Sluts.
have the gay liberation movement, which is attacking masculinity in the nuclear family, and they began to push this propaganda in films and in television in the 1970s. You get into the 80s and the 90s, and you get the birth of the sitcom. Well, the sitcoms have been around already, but you get more and more sitcoms. You
Mhm.
get shows like Married with Children that depicts the dad as a kind of lazy couch potato who's the butt of every joke. Again, you have this kind of systematic attack on masculinity. And so the fact is, unfortunately, in the West, identity is shaped by entertainment. A
Right.
lot of people, a lot of trends are led by entertainment. This is why a lot of time and money is expensed and and the arts and media, because they understand that to the extent that you see a celebrity with this bag or with this brand, people will go out and buy that bag and that brand.
Mm.
And so if they can do that with um, with material, with things that you wear, they can also do that with identities and how you identify.
Mm.
And so again, normalization of lifestyles. The show Martin is a staple, not only in Black culture, but I know a lot of white people who watch the show Martin. But here you had
Used to love that show.
a young man who was unmarried to his girlfriend, and they lived together, and they were shacking up, as the old folks would say. Again, shows like this, Living Single, like they kind of normalized this kind of loose, like untraditional familial setting. And
Right.
as a result, you have more people who are shacking up. And again, like I know some might argue, well, that's a chicken or egg kind of argument. But the thing is, at the same time that you have shows like this becoming popular, you have what follows: less people getting married. You know what I mean? So it's, again, we take our cues from entertainment and television.
Mm-hmm.
And so to the question of what will society look like if LGBT were to have their way, I think we're seeing that unfold before our very eyes.
Right. I definitely agree with that. But let me ask you, like, because, like, would you say, no alternative lifestyle should be portrayed in media? Or should it be? Yeah, let's just stick with the first question. Would you say that a gay person or a trans person shouldn't be inserted into a story, or like a degenerate depiction of a black person? Like, should that just not be portrayed?
I'm not saying that it shouldn't be portrayed. If I were king of America, I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't make it illegal for these images to be portrayed. You know, people are going to do, because for me to say that would be to go against exactly what I said earlier, which is we should have small government.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? Um, what I'm simply acknowledging is the fact that it's all moving in one direction. It's not a matter of we have one gay person here and one gay person there in this movie and in that movie. It's all moving in one direction. You know what I mean? The pervasivity of it and the inundation of it is moving in one direction, which is clear signs of normalization.
Right.
And so again, they are shaping society through entertainment on after what they wish it to look like. And again, this is why I said the LGBT and this kind of do what thou wilt secularism is to the West what Islam is to the Middle East. It is the kind of religion of the land, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And so my rallying cry isn't against Hollywood to stop depicting this stuff. My rallying cry is for parents to be more intentional, much like what you said earlier, with what it is they are showing their children, because it falls on, like, the raising of your child falls on you, not Disney, not Hollywood. Hollywood's going to do what Hollywood does.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I think it's kind of cowardice to spend all my time railing against Hollywood and what they're doing. There's a difference between railing what they're doing and simply acknowledging what they're doing. I'm acknowledging what they're doing, but my end goal is to parents, be mindful of what it is you're putting in front of your children. To the extent that your children see something, because they're bound to see something, because again, it's everywhere. It's on you to provide the necessary commentary, to provide the necessary guidance, and if need be counteractive from what the society is actively doing. Is, we have to be counteractive to their activity, to make sure that we are shaping our children and moving them in the right direction, as opposed to allowing them to be sucked into the Hollywood agenda. And so again, my message is more for people than entities, if that makes sense.
Right, I got you. But at the same time, I feel like, sure, you can make sure your kid got a good foundation, the right foundation, can think for themselves and stuff like that. But it's so pervasive and it's so everywhere. And your kid might be the only kid in his friend group with common sense, and all the rest of them, going to drag queen shows on the weekend with their white liberal moms and stuff, and
which makes common sense not so common in that case.
That's what I'm saying. It's definitely not common anymore. But I'm saying, like, and all kids, I think, at a certain point are going to rebel against their parents. I think it's pretty.
I would have
common.
to push back a little, against that a little bit, though, because I used to think that too. I would have to push back against that because I see firsthand a difference between kids who grow up in households with parents who demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about versus kids who are growing up in the public school system, where they are being exposed to all of this stimuli and all of this information that's unchecked. There's no balance. There's no check. It's just indulgence and complete exposure. I grew up in the public school system, and I did go through a rebellious phase. But when I tell you that I know dozens of kids who were homeschooled or who grew up in an environment with parents who were loving and intentional and present and all the things, and those kids never had a rebellious phase. Even after going off to college, they didn't they weren't so easily dragged into the proverbial college lifestyle of the partying and the drinking and the just basically losing yourself,
Right.
because they had a solid foundation on which they grew. And so again, I don't think it's inevitable that the kid is going to rebel. Again, we are autonomous individuals, and who knows which direction we're going to go, regardless of where we grew up or what kind of parents we had. I mean, I know some families where the parents are very affluent, upper middle class, if not all out wealthy, and their kids turned out to be useless.
Right.
Um, but again, you even look at their background, and even though the parents gave them everything they want, made sure that they had good grades, all the things, you understand that they were grooming their kids to have monetary and status success in their future. And so they weren't so much pouring values
Mm.
and integrity in their kids as much as they were pouring status into their kids, and it backfired, because the kid, they they grew to believe, well, I just want to be loved and I want to feel like I belong, but I feel like I'm not accepted by you unless I get into the Ivy League school, or unless I make this grade, or unless I do this, that, and the other. So you're putting these kind of uh, of burdens on the children, trying to make them live up to your idea of success. And so we
Mm.
have to be careful of that as parents. Uh, Again, I feel like it's more important to nurture your kids, to foster them, to encourage their creativity, but to set a solid foundation of values and integrity, that whenever they are faced with temptation, even the temptation to rebel, they will remember those values at the very least, to where even if they indulge or capitulate, they have a threshold where, okay, I can't go that far. I have to lean back on my values, kind of
Right.
thing. I think it's easy to say, like, oh, well, all kids go through a rebellious phase, but I think to say that is to speak from a place of, people in our age group of millennials, where all we know is a public school upbringing,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, we go to a school, in each classroom there's 30 some odd people. Each child comes from different backgrounds, different family experiences, different beliefs. They're sharing those beliefs with you, whether directly or indirectly. You are being influenced by educators, teachers. A lot of these teachers don't have children themselves. A lot of them just graduated from college. They only took a job as a teacher because they didn't know what the hell they really wanted to do in life. And so it's not like they actually care about their job. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's different influences that are being poured into the kid, and then they come home and they're having to contend with the values of the parents, and the fighting of the parents, and all sorts of things that are going on at home. And it just becomes an absolute mess. The public school system and the kind of centralization thereof has, I think, been more detrimental to society and to family life in particular, than the way it was before, where you had the one room schoolhouse, or people who a simpler time
Mm-hmm.
where you as a boy learned the trade of your dad, and you did the same job your dad did, who did the same job as his dad before him, who did the same job as his dad before them. We could argue that, prior to the industrial revolution, it was harder for society, it was harder for people, and, harder for this and harder for that. But at least you can see through various means that at least people were seemingly happier. At least people were, had their wit about them. Whether you look through any family photo album, whether you look at the black and white photos, like mentioned earlier, of the photographer from Florida, whether
Right.
you look at letters that were written from young men to their lady friends during the Civil War and during the World War I, the way that they wrote, the way that they expressed themselves, the kind of things that they experienced in battle. You see true masculinity, but yet you see this kind of poetic way in which they spoke. It was just a much more dignified person than the kind of short form communication we see in the social media age. And so
Right.
again, there's ways that we can compare and contrast what life looked like before the centralization of public school versus what it looks like after.
Mm. I have to stand corrected on that one, because I definitely, my example when I said that was like everybody I known that has came up in the public school system. You know, I rebelled. My parents were, you know, great examples for me, and you know, they raised me to the best of their ability and, you know, what I would consider the right way, and they were like great examples for me. So, but I still rebelled and like, you know, ran around with my hood rat friends at a point when in my in my teens, and you know, got influenced to, you know, get a whole bunch of tattoos, become a rapper, and you know, go down the path that I went down in life, and only to come back to now. I think more so like my dad, but my dad is still a Democrat and a liberal though, and I'm not so much, and I'm not as religious as my mom and dad, because I feel like you can be indoctrinated into a religion too, based on like where you're from and who your family is, and I haven't came to a place in my life where this is a whole nother conversation, but I feel like it's like a lot of religions, and I feel like maybe that was the original propaganda machine and way to control people. But like I said, we ain't got to go down. Huh?
You say religion was the original propaganda machine?
Yeah, that was the first like way of policing ideas, and to get people to act and be a certain way and control people. In my opinion,
religion was definitely a means of controlling people, or it was used as such, especially the Catholic Church. But that again is why you had like the Reformation with people like John Calvin and Martin Luther, who rebelled against the, you know, state using religion to control people, because when you actually read the Bible in its truest interpretation, you realize like, well, no, this is actually about an individual's personal relationship with God, not using it as a bludgeon to control society. So, but yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I think there's truth to what you're saying, but I think oftentimes people try to use that to discount God or Christ or Christianity altogether. A thing can be used for harm, but that doesn't necessarily make that thing inherently bad. You know, I can use a hammer to bash somebody's head in. That doesn't mean that hammers are in themselves a bad thing. Terrible analogy, but I think you get my point.
I definitely get the point. But you know, I definitely believe in God and higher power and stuff like that. But it's just my upbringing in the church, and you know, just seeing the whole theatrical side of it. Like I remember, and again, I don't want to go down the religion tangent, but I remember like going to my church like up the street, and my pastor had a certain way he conveyed his message. He was a certain theatrical thing about how he talked, and can I get an amen and all this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And it was always entertaining, you know. And then
it didn't seem real.
It didn't seem real when I went to another church, and their pastor did the exact same thing and said the exact same thing. And I went to another church, and it was the exact same thing. And I watch an evangelist preacher on TV, and it's the exact same mannerisms and that they turn on when it's sermon time and stuff. And I'm just like, something in me was just like, what? Like
a performance.
Why is this such a performance, and what are they selling?
Right.
But that doesn't mean I don't believe in God and all that stuff. But yeah, that makes me want to ask you about a total other thing that I don't know if you want to talk about.
You can ask me whatever you want.
What are your thoughts? I'll make a statement and I'll ask you a question, but what are your thoughts on the whole Israel-Palestine situation and the way, I know it's a very complicated issue, but the thing that rubs me the wrong way about it, I understand as much as I can both sides, but it seems I see a lot of people getting canceled for supporting one side over the other. And I don't understand why it's such an agenda by everybody in power in America to support one side over the other, whether it's for so-called religious reasons or, you know, the powers that be want this side to win reasons or whatever, or it's just, to me, like, okay, when like I'm new to all this political stuff, right? But I look at interesting situations and I ask myself questions. October 7th, Hamas attacks Israel, right? And I'll try to say this as fast as I can. Most of the world looks at that event as, oh, this is the start of a this terrorist attack is the start of the conflict between Palestine and Israel. They look at it through that lens, and like, how dare the Palestinians attack the sovereignty of Israel, and they're terrible, they're terrorists and stuff like this. And so I see that, and I'm like, and I've been to Israel and Jerusalem and stuff. And I understand it's the Holy Land, and my perception of it was this is the same Israel from biblical times and stuff like that, which is wrong. I learned that Israel was established in 1948, or was it 47, somewhere around that, and 1948, I believe. And before that, in recorded history, it was Palestine. If you look at any map from those time periods, it was Palestine. You know, the Ottoman Empire, it was a British colony. You know, the Brits owned the land, but the Palestinians lived there. And the Jews lived there in small numbers, as they did in a whole bunch of nations, because they was in exile for a long time and they didn't have their own place to call their own. And they were persecuted in some of the communities that they lived in other places and stuff, Germany being one of them. And after the Holocaust, if I'm not mistaken, the UN was formed, and they decided to, along with the Brits, decided to give Palestine to Israel. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And pretty much the Nakba happened, and from my understanding, that was the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, and they pushed a whole bunch of Palestinians out to form their new nation and state, which is, you know, modern day Israel, which is, and this all happened not even 80 years ago, you know?
Right.
Which seems to me like is the original sin of the whole conflict. You know, these people took their plight, and lobbied and gained leverage to take this land and almost do something very similar to another group of people that happened to them, you know, and try to erase the history. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's not legal to speak about the Nakba in Israel. And it was pretty much just colonization, just like, you know, America came over here and got rid of the Indians to a large extent, and other colonized things, you know, countries and territories in the world and stuff like that. And the Arabs or the Palestinians just didn't agree with their land being taken, and are to this day kind of rebelling against that and fighting back against that. And the Hamas attack was kind of it was bad. You know, people shouldn't die. Terrorism is bad. But it was just, in my understanding, a continuation of the conflict that's been going on since 1948. And beforehand, they like lived together, you know, in kind of, you know, way more harmony than they do now. I've seen rabbis talk about it. And, you know, the Orthodox Jewish people, they don't believe that Israel should be a state. I could talk about this forever, but I'm asking you, like, what is your view on it? And
Yeah. Well, I don't claim to be a geopolitical expert by any stretch of the imagination. Um, but as far as a conflict between Israel and Palestine, I mean, this thing dates back, thousands of years. I mean, heck, even Goliath and David. I mean, this was, for all intents and purposes, a battle between Israel and Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a conflict that has been going on for hundreds of years, and as far as the kind of cancelization you speak of, whenever people stick their neck out and take a stand on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's actually quite interesting. You're either accused of being anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, depending on which side you land on.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to Hamas attacking Israel, they made a calculated decision to do that. And if you're going to deliver a blow like that, you better be ready to deal with the consequences that follow. So, they made their decision, and I don't agree with any aid to their defense, um, because they made their own bed.
Right.
When it comes to Israel, I don't believe that I don't believe in this kind of default of America should support Israel.
Mm.
And the reason I don't agree with that is because America, we have our own battles to fight here. We have a border crisis that we need to get under control.
Oh yeah.
We have a government muck. We have corruption in our government. We have a lot of things here to where we have no business playing world police at this juncture. And not only that, when you look at Israel's military, they have one of the strongest militaries in the world. So let them fight their own battles.
Right.
Again, I don't understand this impulse for America, as if we have this kind of moral high ground to be getting involved in a conflict that has been going on since America even existed, or long before America even existed. And I know that people like to say that, well, as Christians, we're instructed to be supportive of Israel. Well, if you get into the doctrine and theology of that, it's actually talking about something different than how people interpret it. But I digress. Long story short, I again, this is coming from somebody who's not very well versed when it comes to geopolitical activities. From my lay position, I don't see how it is wise for America to get involved on one side or the other. I think that America should stay out of it and focus on our own issues. But I do sympathize with people who say that, well, America has to get involved because, to the extent that, Hamas gets the upper hand or Palestine gets the upper hand and begin to dominate that region of the world and then expand their power abroad, because, when you look at their doctrine and their theology and their agenda, they're very much for eradicating the infidel,
Mm.
with no mercy. So they too have their kind of own globalist agenda. And so we should step in the way of that lest it comes to our borders. So, I get people who argue that. So again, it's for me, if I'm being completely honest with you, um, when I look at what I said and I stand by that, I can't come up with a good enough argument to rebuff the person who believes what I just said, which is, we should stop it in its tracks lest it comes to our borders. I don't know that I have a good enough argument for that, against that right now. So I tend to kind of stay out of it altogether.
Yeah.
But from a religious point of view, um, the Bible does talk about, God blessing those who bless Israel, is that and the third. And for that reason,
Really,
I guess
that's
I
in
support.
that's in the Bible.
Yeah, it's in the Old Testament, but
Okay.
yeah. So but I and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on the theology of this, but I think that it's more or less talking about God's remnant, uh more so than a physical region in the world
Right.
that we call Israel. I think that's more talking about a people, not just quote unquote ethnic Jews, but God's remnant, namely um, those who put their faith and trust in uh, Yeshua, the descendant of David,
Mm-hmm.
um, who God has called people to Himself, called the nations to Himself through, because the Bible teaches that Christ is the only name given under heaven by which man can be saved. There's no other way. Muhammad can't do it. Hinduism can't do, like, no other means that you can get to God but through Christ. And so, to the extent that a person puts their faith and trust in Christ, they become what we call God's remnant. And
Okay.
so, the Bible talks about, in Christ, there's no longer slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, for we're all one in Christ. And so God's remnant is anyone who puts their faith in Him, be they Jew or Gentile. And so, when it talks about, blessing Israel, I think it's more or less talking about God's remnant more so than a physical location on the planet. But that's
Right, because there
that's a whole debate in
was
itself.
the Israel of today
So
is not the Israel that the Bible is referring to. I wouldn't think.
right,
Yeah, I mean, I guess that gets really complicated. It's just interesting to me because I've never seen a terrorist attack happen and a huge swath of the world go protest about saving them. You know, and I don't know much about Islam and like what they believe, or what their doctrine is, or anything like that. But I just think that whole situation is really tragic and really interesting at the same
Oh,
time.
for sure. For sure.
It's there's a lot of Arabic people that live here in Germany. They
Oh, is
kind
there?
of it's similar to like Hispanic people coming to America.
Mhm.
A lot of Arabic people
What kind
move
of
to
jobs do
Germany.
they typically take?
I mean, I can only speak to what I've seen them doing, and a lot of them come here open businesses. They
Mhm.
like on every corner in the city, it's like either a shisha shop, a shisha bar, or people sit down and smoke those little flavored tobacco things, or like
Hookah.
hookah. They call it shisha here, and they open like little shops, like little kiosks, little donor shops, like these little Turkish food shops and stuff. Or they're the ones that have the cleaners or barber
Mhm.
shops, hair salons, stuff like that. They all get money to open businesses when they come here, and they
From the
all
government?
the government helps them out a lot when
Oh,
they
wow.
come over here. Yeah. So they
Mhm.
they say, I have no problem against Arabs and whatever, but a lot of Germans are called racist because they're kind of concerned about how many, because like you said, Germany is really docile, like as a country, like they're super like non-confrontational about a lot of issues and stuff, and they're very liberal about a lot of issues and stuff, and they don't want any conflict. So we let in the most refugees out of anybody in Europe,
Mhm.
and a lot of them say like Germany is going to be an Arabic country soon in the near future, because they're in their culture, they have a lot of kids. It's nothing for like an Arabic family to have like 7-8 kids. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And Germans don't have that many kids. They might have 1 or 2, and it's less and less.
Right.
So most of the time you go out, you see
I wonder
more.
what the demographic.
Like I said, most of the
I
time
wonder
you
what the
go out, you see
demographic
more
balance is.
Arabic people than Germans.
I wonder what the demographic balance is right now in Germany, Arab versus German. Who is the current chancellor in Germany?
I don't know. They just changed them. It was Angela Merkel for a long time, but now it's some new face. But I don't really know his name. I don't really pay much attention to German politics.
Hmm.
Nothing really happens here. Like they keep a lot of their stuff like under wraps. They don't really
Hmm.
broadcast all their shortcomings like America does.
So how do you in Germany get like access to? So would you say that you have more, I guess, news or information coming in from the United States than from Germany,
Oh,
or is
definitely.
it just a matter of what you look into yourself?
No, everybody in Germany knows more about America than they know about what's going on in Germany. And I would say that
That's
for a
interesting
lot
that
of
you say
places in
that
the world.
because yeah, that's interesting that you say that because I was talking to some friends from Canada and they were saying the exact same thing that they know more about American politics than they know about Canadian politics or who's in charge of this or who's in charge of that. They know more about America than Canada. So
Oh,
that's very interesting.
yeah, for sure. That's why I was like, I'm over here I got a perspective from the outside looking in, just like most people in
Mhm.
Europe and in other countries, because America pushes out their politics like a big reality show. It's always something
Mhm.
crazy happening, especially since Trump, because every word he spoke was like, oh shit, what did Trump just say? What did Trump just do? So
Right.
he was the topic. He was just as famous in Germany. I can speak to as he was in America. Like everybody knows who Trump is, has a very strong opinion about him, whether it's for him or against him. People lost relationships for supporting him over here. Family members don't speak to each other because of their American political stances and stuff like that. Like it's really crazy. I've gotten into arguments with people about Trump over here, and it has nothing to do with them.
What was Angela Merkel's position on Trump? Do you know?
Just that he was like a buffoon who didn't know like what he was talking about or what he was doing. Like when he was in office, him in America was just like the laughing stock of Europe. Like they only talked about him to make fun of, you know, something America put out about him.
And how good of a job did Angela Merkel do as chancellor? Was she
She was
like how was
chancellor
she
for a
like
long
what was her
time.
what was sorry?
She was chancellor for a long time, and everybody
What
she's very well loved by Germans.
that's interesting though because what was her position with the onslaught of Arabs moving into Germany? Was she against it? Was she neutral on it? Was
She
she
was for it.
like all for it?
She was
So
for
that's
it.
interesting though because like how is it that on the one hand the German people um have an issue with the influx of Arabs moving in, but yet they love the woman who was all for it and was a position, in a position of leadership.
Well, you
That
got to
seems like
think
a
about like the German mentality. Like they, Hitler's from here. You know,
Mhm.
they, the Holocaust happened here. They don't want no problems. You know what I'm saying? Like they, they're super liberal. It's still a Nazi party here, but they don't get really support like that. But the fact that Germany doesn't really have an army, like they have an army, but it's really passive. Like they don't even have they're not really equipped for battle. They're like a support army and stuff, and people can serve or not. You can do like a few months to a year. Like you don't. It's not really like this is not a conflict country. Like everybody was cool with it when she decided to let so many people in, but and the people who weren't didn't want to be the person speaking out against it. You know what I'm saying? They'll talk about it at home and while they're drinking their little tea and eating their bread or whatever, but nobody is gonna make a political stance and say and speak out against a people because they don't want to be perceived how oh shit, here come the Nazis again. You know, they persecuting another group of people. You know.
That's a very interesting thing. It reminds me of a story I heard a few years ago on PBS where there was a white man, older white man, who came out of a store to see his car being stolen by three young black men.
Mm-hmm.
And they drove away in the car. And he called 911 because he didn't know what else to do. So he called 911 and he told them, my car was just stolen and it was three young African American men. I hesitated to call the police, but I didn't know who else to call. Please don't send the police to find them.
Mm.
Send the EMT or, send the ambulance or someone like that. But please don't hurt these young men. And so this is this kind of mentality, once again, that I think is shaped by indoctrination, where you're afraid to do what's right or to speak out, even if it's, you're speaking from a place of honor or genuine concern, because you will be labeled a racist or whatever the case may be. So you are willing to have your belongings and your property stolen, or even be shot at or harmed in some way, so long as you aren't accused of being a racist or a Nazi or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And so I think that's a very troubling thing, where we are, our arm is kind of twisted behind our back to be able to acquiesce to this kind of faux reality in pursuit of something that's not real, so long as certain other people get their way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I was listening to you earlier where you said that German people are accused by Arabs of being racist because there's certain German people who are concerned about the influx of Arabian people who are moving in.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is a common tactic that's used, where I want to call you this pejorative so as to neutralize you. And because to the extent that you're neutralized, it then allows me to do more of what I'm trying to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? I want to be able to do my dirt in public, and to the extent that you call me out for it, I'm going to call you some pejorative, and that will silence you long enough to keep on doing my dirt in public. This thing happens all over the world. And it's happening right now in the United States as we speak.
Yeah, it's the same thing that's happening with the border and New York and Florida busing all the asylum seekers to Chicago and New York, when New York was like, come one, come all, we want you to come
right.
here, we want your culture. We're gonna we're gonna house you, we're gonna protect you, we're gonna take care of you. We're not gonna be like those bad Republican states who say who say close the border and stuff like that, because they just racist. But when they was saying we want the border, we want more help at the border, and we need to close the border because we can't handle all these people, and we're right at the border, and I think it was a brilliant idea and strategy for them to start busing people to these sanctuary states who was talking all this shit for,
you said you're a sanctuary.
Yeah, you said you're the sanctuary and you inviting them. So here they are. And now they like, oh, this is a national crisis. We can't handle these people. We want you to come to the States, but please don't come here, Eric Adams. And, shut the fuck up. I'm sorry for my language, but talking all that shit, and then when the shit hit the fan, you like, oh, now I get it. But it's too late now. It's too late.
DeSantis and Abbott, they called their bluff.
Yeah.
So, and they were sending these people to Martha's Vineyard too, where Obama lived. They hurried up and kicked those people out of there.
Yeah, it's all you can be. You can virtue signal your ass off and talk all the mess in the world, but when it really hits home, then you kind of have to agree with people who are looking at it, you know, from a perspective of what the outcome is going to be. You know, what is this going to turn into in the future? You know, of course, everybody, you know, you want to help people, but, you know, do you have the resources to help 200,000 people who come to your city in the span of 1 year?
Right.
You know, no, you don't. And then you want to cry to the federal government to give you more money, and they say no, and then you act like, I think Eric Adams trying to act like it's a racist thing that Biden is refusing to like give him money for that.
Right.
But like the whole sanctuary city thing is like, we're not going to assist the government in kicking illegal immigrants out. So you're not going to assist the government in like protecting the borders and stuff, but you're going to ask the government to give you money to house and feed the people that you don't want to assist them with. What sense does that make, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the kind of thing. But Germany, they don't let up on letting people in. Like the public transportation system is so backed up over here because it's so many immigrants coming over here all the time, and they gotta travel with the public transportation system, and like all the trains are backed up. It doesn't affect me because I drive, but a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
But that's not neither here nor there. I wanted to ask you a few more questions. I don't know how much more time you got.
I probably got like 5 minutes.
Okay, let's get to this one last thing. It's a movie coming out that I don't know if you know about. It's called The American Society of Magical Negroes. You heard about this?
I heard about it. Yeah, I heard it from Anthony Brian Logan.
Oh yeah, I saw him talking about it. Huh?
Yeah, I saw that this morning. But I didn't get to watch the trailer for it. But I heard about the synopsis of it. And who is producing this film? Do you know?
Let me see who's producing this film. It's a feature film that's gonna be in theaters. Like it's a real.
Has it already
movie.
been released? Because I heard that it went viral. So I was wondering what went viral. Was it the trailer that went viral? Was
the trailer,
the
trailer went viral. Maybe I can play it in the program. Let me see if I can play it. Bear with me here for a second. Pretty ridiculous plot to the movie though, and what a name. Can you see that?
I can see a part of it, but I can't hear it. Oh yeah, I can see it. It's a vertical video.
Can you hear it? You probably can't hear it though, because I can't hear it. Okay, let me try one more thing.
I will step on through a mic here.
It's gonna take too much for me to get the video in there. I should have queued it up before. But the premise of the movie is just like, it's a group of magical Negroes that
actors, right?
Yeah. And the main character is like a mixed kid, but it's a lot of prominent black actors in it, I think. But the whole premise is like these magical Negroes exist to placate to white people, to keep them happy, so they don't become the most dangerous thing the world have ever seen, and that's a angry white person. And like it's a scene that pops up where this this white person is about to get mad about something, or he's about to be sad about something, and a meter pops up next to him, and it has like white tears on it, and it's like a meter that's like kind of going up, and the dude has to kind of step into the situation and do some magic trick and like make the white person feel comfortable again and stuff like that. And it's like a love story involved, but the name and the premise of the movie is just a lot for me. And I don't know like what they're trying to do with this movie and what studio picked it up to put it in, like to give it a theatrical release. Like the whole thing was like a Key and Peele skit like a few years ago. I don't know if you ever saw that. But
the thing about movies like this, and they come out ever so often. I know Barack Obama, he has his film production company called Higher Ground or something like that, which releases all of their films exclusively on Netflix.
They just dropped one,
Jay-Z,
right?
yeah. Jay-Z found himself in the film production industry. He's releasing, if not already, a film where Jesus is black and he's smoking weed and all this other nonsense. So, I mean, ever so often, they will release these films, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where you are kind of normalizing, in this case, the beliefs and feelings and sensations that a lot of folks, unfortunately, in Black culture have.
Mm-hmm.
Namely that, Black people, we've always saved democracy. We have always saved, the world, and we are kings and queens and this, that, and the third. To the extent that you can keep people in this kind of stupor, you can always count on them to assist you with whatever political program you wish to push. And I know that seems far-fetched, but again, this is the point of a lot of entertainment. This is the point of a lot of these films and stuff that get released. As I said earlier, a lot of what we see and how we see reality is shaped by what we see in entertainment. A lot of people, for example, their only idea of what slavery was like comes from what they saw in the film Roots.
Right.
Not from actual. I mean, they have the I forget what they called them, but what was it called? There was an actual name for it, but some journalists actually interviewed real slaves, and they even got some of these interviews on camera, where you had slaves, I think back in the 1930s and 40s, who were talking about their experience on the plantations and all the things. And it's a night and day difference from what those interviews revealed versus what we actually see in Roots. That's not to say that slavery was this, great time that everybody was having. But again, a lot of what we saw in films like Roots were, there were liberties taken.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so as you fast forward to today, whether you're talking about Jordan Peele's film Get Out, or even this film, The Magical Negro, and every film in between, which kind of reinforces this notion that white people need us, or that everybody wants to be us, or whatever the case may be. I think it has the same kind of intoxicating effect as alcohol.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, I have a friend who is a missionary, he and his wife, and they're serving in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asking him about his experiences there and the people that he's met and all this. And he said, it's interesting that everybody is drunk and high. He says it's hard to get people to work because, their whole strategy is to introduce like the free market to these people so that they can learn how to get on their own 2 feet without depending on the state, without depending on the government, and to also share the gospel with them, because we're trying to give you work ethic, but we're also trying to give you ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And work is a big part of that. And we're teaching them how to start businesses and do these things. but we're having a hard time because everybody just choose to be drunk and high. And as it turns out, the government incentivizes the drunkenness and the highness and the inebriation of its people, because the government has a vested interest in keeping the people intoxicated and thus debilitated enough to take care of themselves, to fend for themselves. And so if you think about it, if I can tell you on the one hand that you are oppressed and that the white man doesn't want you to get ahead, I can tell you that on one hand, that kills your spirit. But if I tell you at the same time that you're a king and you're a queen and everybody wants to be you and everybody's jealous of you, that gives you this kind of sense of entitlement. So not only are you not putting in the same kind of work ethic as your non-black neighbor because you feel like, what's the use? You also feel that you're entitled to reaping the benefits of living, housing, all the things that go along with it, because you're entitled, because you're a king and you're a queen. And so again, that I get that sounds like a far-fetched kind of stretch between a film like this and what it is I'm talking about. But what I'm simply trying to communicate is how films, music, a lot of these things reinforce the ethos, the pathology, and the mores of culture. And it kind of reinforces and validates a lot of the preconceived notions and mythology that Black culture has, that keeps them ever in this kind of chaotic, dysfunctional state. I'm hoping that makes sense.
It definitely makes sense, and I totally agree. You mentioned roots a lot in this. I wanted to ask you about that too. You say you ain't got much time, but I looked into the whole roots thing because I remember roots and like Kunta Kinte and I recently came across the fact that most of his depiction in the book and the television series was plagiarized, or the book was plagiarized, and it was an exaggeration of the experience of slavery. And I think he was even quoted as saying like his people needed a depiction of slavery to like live by or something. I can't remember his like exact quote, but he pretty much admitted that he like, of course slavery was a horrible thing, you know what I'm saying? But he made like Roots, and his depiction of it is like every Black person's idea of what slavery was. Even to this day, I think people think that was more of a documentary than like a fictional story,
Yeah, we do that with every Hollywood film, though. We take it as gospel instead of realizing no, they probably took liberties with this, and that goes for right or left.
Yeah.
Both sides do it, really. But
yeah, I feel like we could talk about these issues forever, but I'll let you go, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about what we talked about, and I hope we can do this again, man.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely would love to come back and continue the conversation, because as you said, it sounds like you had more questions, and I know I had a lot more to say on the subjects I was talking about, especially since I know and I realize that what I was saying with the civil rights movement and stuff like that, a lot of it is stuff that people have never heard before or never really thought about. And, I'm contending with 40, 50 years of enshrined and indoctrinated, concluded fact in a lot of people's eyes. Like, how dare you tell me that Martin Luther King isn't this great hero? How dare you tell me that the civil rights movement wasn't the greatest thing that ever happened in America? I understand that. And, but again, everything that I've done, as well as research, well documented, people can learn more about everything that it is I'm talking about with our film Uncle Tom 2, which is on Amazon. It's on Vudu and a couple of other streaming platforms. And we're going to come out with a part 3 within the next year or so.
Oh yeah.
Where we go into the history of what we call Black culture, or the myth of Blackness. And And yeah, so got a lot of work coming down the pipes. So
The myth
excited
of
about that.
blackness. No, everything you're talking about is everything I'm interested in. And like I said, I got a million more questions for you, especially since you said like the myth of blackness. And I would assume that's kind of about like where black culture came from and where we think it came from and where it really came from, which is like redneck white people that we that we came up around and adopted their degenerate culture and stuff like that. Am I going down the right path and stuff?
That's like an eighth of it, but yes. Looking at it too, like how prior to the 1960s, there was really no distinguishable difference between what we call black culture, and how most white folks were living. In terms of, if you look at income, if you look at family sizes, if you look at values and things people cared about, there's really the only differences weren't so much black and white. The differences were regional. That is to say that most Southerners, black and white, agreed on most things. Most Northerners, black and white, agreed on most things. It wasn't until in the 70s, 60s, and 70s where you had the emergence of black exploitation films, which popularized, I should say, thug culture, drug selling and dealing and
sex,
pimping and hoeing and all the things.
Right.
You saw this kind of push of black assertion. James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, Black Power. There's a third where blacks began to embrace African culture, although it wasn't really African culture. It was just a concoction of a bunch of mess. You saw black folks naming their children all sorts of what they thought was African names, but wasn't really African names, or just coming up with names out of nowhere. Again, insisting on their blackness because they wanted to rebel against what they saw as Eurocentrism and white culture. And so we're looking at the origins of that. Where did this fad come from? Where did this trend come from? So yeah, it's a myth of blackness. What black culture was made in a Hollywood basement. It's not real.
Wow.
It's not real because it came seemingly out of nowhere. So we're going to be looking at and dissecting that. So
I hope y'all put hip hop in there a little bit too, because
yeah.
I think they
definitely going to be put
hip hop got a big responsibility in the degenerate modern day culture of black people. But yeah,
for sure.
Like I said, I don't want to hold you up, man. I appreciate you. Do you want to like tell people where they can find you, like your social media handles or anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, you can find me at Chad O Jackson on I'm on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And apart from that, man, just working on some films. We're coming out with a film called Comrade Yuri, about Yuri Bezmenov, the KGB agent who defected and tried to sound the alarm about Soviet influence in American culture. He educated us on what ideological subversion is and how a lot of what we think is reality isn't reality at all. It's all a lot of it is indoctrination and programming through entertainment, through news, this, that, and the third. He was able to really articulate that in a very profound way. So we're making a film about him. So yeah, I basically keep to myself and stay quiet. I do some stuff on, like I said, YouTube and IG, but if you're interested in learning more about me, you can find me on those places.
Okay, man. Well, we appreciate you, and I'll let you get out of here. And good luck in all your endeavors, and let's do this again in a few months or when your next project comes out.
Definitely. I enjoyed it.
Me too, man. All right. Peace.